open at 6 p.m. and start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I believe we're fully accounted for. Just checking if Councillor Loden has joined us on Zoom. Not yet. Okay, so I believe Councillor Loden will be attending via Zoom, so we'll consider him just running a little bit behind for now, not an apology. So I'll move to public question time and receiving of public statements. So we have two members in the public gallery this evening, but we also do have some questions that have been provided on notice, but I'll go to you first, Lou, if you'd like to speak, or are you just wanting to do a deputation this evening? Well, yeah, we do have a separate part for deputations just in case you do run over. So we might just hold over if you wouldn't. Yeah, Paul, you're able to speak to if you would like during public question time.
This is unique. Good evening, Mayor, Councillors and Council Officers. As I'm sure you're aware, my name is Paul DeFlorio. I am the Director of Adbrands Media, the applicant for the proposed rooftop garden terrace with digital screen for number 12 Newcastle Street, item 9.3. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak here tonight. So I appreciate that. Last Tuesday night, the council officer pointed out there is only one billboard in the city of Vincent at the corner of Newcastle and Loftus Street. That isn't quite correct. There are two sites and 4 billboards at the city that the city of Vincent have previously approved. 2 at the corner of Newcastle and Loftus Street and 2 at the corner of Newcastle and Fitzgerald Street. At the time, the councillors used their discretion to approve these billboards, and that is what we are asking here tonight. Furthermore, there are 90 bus shelters within the city of Vincent having third-party advertising on them, with a further 4 bus shelters having digital advertising on them. Billboards and third-party advertising is not a new thing to the city of Vincent. These bus shelters with advertising on them have been approved for the next 15 years, as the council officer pointed out last Tuesday night. Out-of-home media, yes, maintained the bus stops and therefore also look after the advertising. Likewise, we, Adbrands Media, fully intend to maintain our billboard. The landscape and location must be taken into consideration also. The location is on the furthermost point of the city of Vincent, not in the middle of suburbia. It is in the commercial area, not residential. The billboard therefore also fits the landscape of the surrounding area with next DC building to the left and Caltex petrol station not far on the right. This is a one-off site and the only site within the city of Vincent we are wanting your support and approval for. We therefore request your support tonight and leave our future in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We'll just go to the questions that we've received on notice and then we'll return to you, Lou, when we come to deputations. Thank you. Manager of Governance, would you like to read out the statements? Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We've received some questions and statements from Dudley Marr of Highgate. The first statement relates to item 10.1, which is the Waste Strategy Project. The Waste Strategy Project is appalling on a number of levels, and I'd suggest that another alternative is to get staff who can provide a competitive, cost-effective and contemporary service. Dudley Marr has also raised a number of questions that relate to items that are not on the agenda. I'll read them out now. The first one, how much has the city spent on consultants in developing the integrated transport plan? What is the estimated cost of staff time in developing the plan? What is its current status? Second question, at the 30th of March and 18th of August meetings, the council agreed to exemptions under Schedule 2, Part 7, Clause 61(2)(d) of the Planning and Development Local Planning Scheme Regulations 2015. That clause refers to temporary uses in existence for 48 hours or a longer period agreed by the local government. Both council decisions neglected to explicitly specify a longer period as required by the regulations. Was it an oversight, and does the failure to nominate a period mean that temporary uses are restricted to 48 hours? What temporary uses would be allowed under Vincent's approach, which would not be allowed under the Minister's notice of exemption of 30th of April? Third question is, in December 2016, the city completed a bike boulevard which extended along Shakespeare Street from Scarborough Beach Road to Green Street and which cost $757,000. In March this year, prior to any COVID restrictions, the Bicycle Network conducted the annual Super Tuesday bike count. This counts all bicycle usage at strategic intersections during the morning peak period. Can the administration confirm that the results of this year's count showed that not a single cyclist used the bike boulevard between Scarborough Beach Road and Green Street? What confidence does the administration have that there will be any more cyclists using the proposed bike route along Strathcona Street, or will this be more wasted money providing bike routes that cyclists don't use? Question 4, the answers to previous questions about the elements of the built form policy requiring applicants to provide urban design studies and to meet specified sustainability performance standards, plus the monthly application statistics indicate that not all development applications are required to provide these. What criteria do the staff use to determine when these are required, and how do applicants know prior to submitting an application when they are required to provide them? Why aren't these criteria included in the policy? Question 5, the minutes of the Reconciliation Working Group indicate that the group recently considered the co-naming of Hyde Park. Given that the council requested that the co-naming of World Square be progressed over 10 years ago, and the response from administration on the 8th of March 2016 in response to a motion at the AGM was that it would be referred to the Reconciliation Working Group. Has the co-naming of World Square been referred to the working group, and what is the status of the initiative? Question 6, there are currently plans out for public comment for a single dwelling at 67 Mary Street in Highgate. Two of the areas which do not meet the deemed to comply provisions are the garage setback and the garage width. The problem is that the plans clearly show that the garage faces the laneway and not the street. Who checks assessments before they are put out for comment, and who takes responsibilities for the incorrect assessment? We've also received some questions and comments from Andrew Main of North Perth. They don't relate to items on the agenda. First one is about parking across footpaths. I have submitted numerous online and verbal requests for rangers to deal with the regular parking of vehicles across the footpath at 2 properties on Worsley Street, Mount Lawley. Will the city be taking any action to prevent this from occurring in the future? Beatty Park Reserve, there are 2 water fountains at the reserve. One was turned off in 2019, the other earlier this year. Is there a plan to turn these back on? Do the works that took place on the demolished pavilion site comply with safety and disability regulations? In particular, the gradient of the ramp leading from the reserve to the car park and the drop of approximately 1 metre from the garden to the car park. William Brisbane Street two-way project. When did council approve this project? Were members of the community given the opportunity to make comment on detailed plans for this project before the city finalised its plans and carried out the works? Is council aware that there are no curb ramps or median strips on William Street between Brisbane and Newcastle Streets? Does council consider the lack of safe pedestrian crossing points acceptable? In addition, is this situation in compliance with the relevant disability laws and regulations? William Wilcott Street intersection. Is council aware that the curb ramps and median island cutouts on Walcott Street on the southern side of this intersection have recently been removed? Why were these works considered necessary? Who approved these works? Prior to these works being approved, was public feedback sought? If so, when and how did this occur? Driveways and crossovers. I refer to the city's policy on driveways and crossovers. I note that this policy states that the maximum driveway width is to be 6 metres. As such, is the street frontage of a property. If a street frontage, of a property is 6 metres or less, could a crossover covering the entire verge be constructed? If so, is council concerned about this outcome and taking any steps to change the laws relating to this issue? In addition, I am aware of the property where a recently constructed driveway and associated crossover is 8 metres in width. Given the city's policy, are these works illegal? And last comment on verge paving. I note that the city's policy that governs the paving of verges, this policy indicates that verges can be paved to a maximum width of 7.5 metres. If this is the case and the street frontage of a property is 7.5 metres or less, does this mean the entire verge can be paved? If so, is the council concerned with this potential outcome? Thank you, Mayor Cole. That's all the questions and statements we've received.
Thank you very much.
Through you, Mayor Cole, a number of those questions don't relate to specific items on the agenda, and administration would intend to respond in writing in the meeting notes for the next meeting.
Thank you very much. I think the only one from Mr. Meyer was just a comment in relation to the waste item on tonight's agenda, and all of the questions from Mr. Main were not on the agenda this evening. So nonetheless, those responses will be provided in the agenda papers for next month. I'm now going to response to previous public questions taken on notice, and I'm just noting that there's a response 3.1 to Sally Lake of Highgate about the tree selection tool. I see the response says that the tree selection tool was developed as a administrative use only and provides a guide for staff on street tree selection based on various streetscape topologies within the city. My understanding was that that tool was actually relatively complex to use, isn't really kind of user-friendly for external residents, say, for example, if they wanted to find a tree to plant in their backyard, but that we were preparing information for community members about tree planting. I just thought perhaps this could be a little bit more of a fulsome response provided to that particular question.
Yeah, through my call, we can have another look at the answer and expand. We certainly, I mean, the key point is we certainly will help residents select trees if they need some advice from us. That's not a problem.
Thank you, Director. Okay, so we'll move on then to applications for leave of absence. I believe there was one for myself, but I may not need it anymore. Yes, I think I can attend if need be. I'll be in the metro area. Or should I just still take the leave? Okay.
I'm happy to sit in the chair. So.
Okay, all right. So the leave request, I think it was the 4th to the, I did send an email. I can't remember now. Let me just check. Is it in the agenda?
Through your Mayor Cole,
here
to
we
note,
go. Yes, sorry, my
leave
apologies.
from 6 to 10 October.
It is
inclusive.
from the 6th to the 10th of October. And we will require a committee member to attend that meeting. So could I please have a mover and seconder? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Fotakis. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Thank you. So I'll now go to receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations. We do have a request for a deputation this evening, one from Mr. Lou DeFloro. So I'll now invite you forward for your deputation. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and council officers. My name is, as you know, Lou DeFlorio, and I'm the manager of Adbrands Media, the applicant for the proposed rooftop garden terrace with digital screen for 12 Newcastle Street, Perth, and it's item 9.3, and it's a SAT reconsideration. On 2nd of July 2020, the State Administrative Tribunal, or SAT, attended a mediation session where SAT invited the city to reconsider its decision pursuant to Section 31 of the State Administrative Tribunal Act 2004, subject to amended plans and additional information being submitted by the applicant to address the reasons for refusal. Following mediation, the applicant submitted amended plans and additional information for the city's reconsideration at the invitation of the SAT, summarised as follows. 1. The proposed display size of the digital screen has been reduced to 85 square metres as per the Main Roads WA policy and as recommended by the manager of Main Roads WA, who was in attendance at the SAT mediation. 2. A draft signage strategy in support of the proposed sign has been submitted to Council. 3. We have submitted perspective images of the proposed sign as viewed from the mixed-use R160 zone site at 71 Edward Street, Perth, currently the Hanson concrete batching plant. The photos taken from 71 Edward Street clearly support the fact that with the introduction of the rooftop garden terrace with digital screen, it will not take away whatsoever any existing views, because the building across Newcastle Street is 10 stories in height. Next, DC will also be building a 8-story high building next to the existing 10-story building on Newcastle Street. 4, Main Roads WA requested updated crash calculation data, which has been provided by TransCore, who are the professional experts when it comes to preparing road safety reports. Main Roads WA also utilises the professional services of TransCore. This makes them a highly reputable organisation. A crash occurred on the 27th of September 2015, that's almost 5 years ago, where a driver was on East Parade and wrongly turned onto East Parade off-ramp, travelling east, and caused a fatal crash. This accident happened 920 metres away from the building, with the driver heading east in the total opposite direction from the building and in an area where the building is not even visible at all. This one crash should be excluded from the crash calculation because of the way that this crash occurred and the fact that it is not a true representation of safety levels along this section of the Graham Farmer Freeway. If this one crash is excluded, then the crash calculation does not fail and the location of the proposed rooftop garden terrace with digital screen satisfies the crash criteria requirement of the Main Roads WA policy. We believe that we now satisfy the requirements as set out in the mediation process of the State Administrative Tribunal, and we now would like to encourage this council to please support and approve this development application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lou. Okay, we'll move to the confirmation of minutes. This is for the ordinary meeting of the 18th of August 2020. Could I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Moved Councillor Wallace, seconded Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? I declare the minutes carried. Okay, I will now go to announcements by the presiding member. I do have a few things to mention this evening. I just wanted to note that where is it? Item 11.6, the adoption of the property management framework has been withdrawn by administration. There were a number of questions that arose through the council briefing process, and that has been withdrawn for further work to be undertaken. Also, just to mention that we do have some key items on tonight's agenda. Consideration of the commercial waste service is a big one this evening, and also the adoption of the Vincent Rebound Plan. I'm not sure whether the rebound plan is going to be debated this evening, so I just thought that I would mention that this is the next phase that we're entering, following on from our COVID response and relief strategy. This is the next phase in that we're feeling quite fortunate in Perth at this moment to be able to think about economic rebound and resilience in our community. So this next plan has a big focus on health and wellbeing for our community and really helping our local businesses to thrive and diversify and even start up. And that might seem impossible right now, but it is amazing to see that new businesses are actually opening up in the City of Vincent. So that's fantastic. We have already reduced red tape through planning exemptions, but there's a lot more that we can do. We're going to be focusing priority capital works and improvements in our town centres, and our spending wherever the possible will be with our local businesses and contractors. We have teamed up with our neighbouring inner city councils to promote our inner city attractions through Visit Perth, and we've had a lot happening in that space in terms of promoting people in relation to coming and visiting and having an enjoyable time in the City of Vincent and our neighbouring inner city areas. And we are really about promoting the opportunity to enjoy smaller scale events, celebrate our diversity, experience public art, and participate in our sporting clubs and community groups, which have been so important during this time. Also, some upcoming news that the completion of the Banks Reserve Playground and Active Zone is edging ever closer, and it is our intention to hold a small, informal but fun opening on the last day of school term. We were really keen to get this finalised in time for the school holidays so that the kids and young people can make the most of it during that time. So on Friday, the 25th of September at 3:30 p.m, we'll be inviting kids down to run through some ribbons and have the first taste of what that new playground and active zone is like. So we'll be promoting that soon. And also I just wanted to reflect that Councillor Fotakis and I today attended the memorial service of Rebecca Egan, and we celebrated her life today at Arranmore Senior College, where some years before she was the head girl. And Rebecca was a member of our community, and her passing has impacted so many people that we all know in our community, particularly in Leederville and Mount Hawthorn, and also within the planning community, because Rebecca Egan was a very professional young planner who worked at the Department of Planning. It's clear that Rebecca was an exceptional person of many, many talents, and she was an active volunteer and had participated in Leederville Connect, one of our local town teams, and had been on the board at the time with Councillor Fotakis when she was part of Leederville Connect. And when she was a student at Arranmore Senior College, she did receive the City of Vincent Citizenship Award, and was remembered fondly there for having many talents and being an incredibly inclusive, respectful and helpful member of her community. A very sad situation where we know that depression has no boundaries, and I think that this is something that I've really been reflecting on in relation to, even through our recent consultation with youth, youth telling us that mental health issues and community connection is so critical. And I think many young people are facing some really complex situations brought about through modern life. So it was a wonderful celebration and a very special person in our community. Okay, so we'll now go to declarations of interest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have the declarations of interest from Councillor Topberg from the briefing session last week, which are noted in the minutes. The first being a financial interest in relation to item 10.1, the waste strategy project. Councillor Topberg declared that he operates a business which would be directly impacted by the proposed changes and is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in the chambers or vote on the matter. And the other declaration of impartiality from Councillor Topberg relates to item 9.1 in relation to number 465 William Street, noting that the applicant is a personal acquaintance. And Mayor Cole, I'd make a declaration of a financial interest in relation to item 7.2, which relates to the annual CEO performance review and key performance indicators. That report does consider my remuneration package, which I have a direct interest in. So I note that financial interest, and I'll leave the chamber when council considers that item.
Thank you very much, CEO. Okay, so so far we have heard from the public gallery on item 9.3, and 10.1 was also briefly mentioned in one of the public questions on notice. So I'll now go around the room to see which items council members would like to pull forward for debate. Councillor Hallett, Councillor Castle, Councillor Wallace.
12.10, including the confidential attachment.
Oh yes, that's our absolute majority decision required, yes. Thank you. Councillor Fotakis, Councillor Smith, Councillor Toppelberg.
Sorry. 9.1, 9.4, 10.2, 12.4, 12.6 and 12.8, please.
Sorry, can we just go through that again?
9.1, so 9.1 William Street.
Yep.
9.4 Rebound Plan. 10.2 Manor Inc. 12.4 the meeting procedures.
Yep.
12.6 Royal Park Bethany Group, and 12.8, which is the audit committee, which unless well, that's got to be.
No, we
pulled
do
out
need to
separately.
pull that forward, that's right. Okay, let me just check. 9.1.
None from Zoom either.
Oh, I'm sorry, do you know, Councillor Loden, I've moved the screen and you're supersized, so to avoid missing you, but thank you very much for calling out. So
I
your
can see myself.
time's bigger this time than you were at the briefing. Okay.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll read out the items that are proposed to be moved en bloc by council, which includes items 9.2, items 11.1, 11.2, 11.3, 11.4, 11.5, 12.2, 12.3, 12.5, 12.7, 12.9, 12.11, 12.12. Confidential items we'll do separately. And just a note, Mayor Cole, that we haven't drawn out any.
I'm just wondering if anyone wants to consider, do you want to discuss both of those, one of those, none of those, because we can move those en bloc. Does anyone in favour? I declare the en bloc items carried. So we will go to the first item raised by a member of the public gallery this evening, which is 9.3. And then following that will be 10.1, which was raised during a question on notice. And then we will move sequentially through the remaining items. So the first item, 9.3, number 12, Newcastle Street, Perth, proposed third-party digital billboard sign. This is a Section 31 reconsideration from the State Administrative Tribunal. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. I have a bit of a cold, so please bear with me. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the applicant's personal circumstances in this, which you relayed to me. I am sympathetic with your personal situation, and I do understand that reality. On the flip side, from a personal point of view, I quite dislike the amount of advertising we have in the public domain. And I think it has a net negative impact on our society. The reality is that neither of those considerations are relevant in this. It is a planning decision, and we are guided by what our planning policies say. And that policy is pretty clear. It is old, I acknowledge that as well. But from my perspective, that is still relevant. If that was put up for consideration now, I would still support that as the policy for the city. And that does outline that these are not allowed. I recognise also that we do have the ability to disregard that and make our own decision as well. And that has happened in previous cases, as we talked about in the briefing. There is advertising on our bus ports, which is part of a deal that enables those bus ports to be maintained on behalf of the city. There's also some other locations around the city where there is this public advertising, including not far from the council chambers, just on Loftus Street. that specific location, as an example, is an undevelopable piece of land because of inability to access it via car. So that particular billboard enables that space to be not an eyesore effectively for passing commuters. It's hopeful that at some point in the future that will be merged with the neighbouring site, but at this point in time, that is a preferable outcome for our community than what we see here. So weighing that all up, I don't see a broader community benefit for the city in going against our policy, and I support the policy position.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, look, tonight we're considering or reconsidering a request for a sign that has a number of departures from the city's signs and advertising policy, including its placement on top of the building as opposed to being an integral part thereof. The proposed sign is also significantly larger than what is contemplated by the policy, although I do acknowledge that there has been over time a reduction in the size of the proposed sign. I think that at 85.2, I believe, square metres, it is significantly larger than the 18 square metres that would be contemplated under the policy. I walk past this site every day I walk past this site Monday to Friday on my way to and from work, and I do accept that this sign would impact the surrounding area. I can certainly attest that from the pedestrian bridge, a sign of this scale would be impactful to pedestrians and cyclists using that bridge. And so I do accept the rationale that the sign would be impacting to amenity. I also note the age of the policy, but do accept that the city has largely been consistent in its application of this policy in relation to third-party advertising. I've never approved a new third-party advertising sign. I've been involved in the extension of approvals of the 2 existing signs in place, but this isn't something that's common within the city, and I do have concerns that without, if a sign of this size was to be approved without a more nuanced or contemporary or related policy position, that it would leave the city open to challenge in terms of consistency of application of our decision making at SAT, and that it would potentially lead to, aftermarket additions of large-scale signs on top of existing buildings to display third-party advertising across the city. And I don't accept that that is a benefit to the people who live here or who move through the city. And so I am supportive of the officer's recommendation for refusal, again, in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Back in front of us again. My position on this hasn't changed since the last time it came before us. Would I want to see a proliferation of billboards in the city? No. But however, on this instance, I've continued to consider the matter as the location of the particular billboard. The location on the very edge of our city, metres from the city of Perth, where we see a very different consideration. And I do appreciate we have our own policies, but we have a situation where we often talk about transition, portions of transition between our city and our neighbours. And I think this is one of those that personally I have given consideration to the surrounds. It's quite a harsh and car-centric part of the city. I go through there and I've spent quite a bit of time traversing both in car and on foot to really get a good feel for the area. There's more tarmac than trees. It's not a really typical part of our city. I note the assessment by the design review panel and appreciate that the proposal has progressed through the DRP process and arrived at its current design. There's been quite a number of design changes throughout that process. With the crash data, I also appreciate that there's still contention with that one crash and the sign. However, with the resizing now meeting the MWA standards. So for a whole range of reasons, but predominantly for me, a consideration of what's in front of me with this particular location. I won't be voting in for the officer's recommendation in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Councillors, any further comments? Look, I will speak to it. I concur very strongly with the comments from Councillor Gontaszewski. I think the policy, whilst it has been in place for some time, it has a strong visual amenity principle underpinning it, and I believe that has been consistently applied by the City of Vincent Council. It is something that I also would seek to continue to support, and I would, if we do need to look at the policy again, I see that fundamental principle as something that I would be continuing to support. I do think that this is an important matter, as I do think it would set a precedent in the way in which billboards, third-party advertising is considered, perhaps not by this council, but by also SAT. I do believe that this policy is really about avoiding a proliferation of large-scale advertising signage. I note Councillor Fotakis's comments around location, and I understand why that has been raised. I think it's probably worth mentioning that we have had an application on Edward Street in this vicinity, because I think that this is seen as prime real estate around the tunnel where you do have that flow of traffic. So I do think that this would lead to either a resurgence of at least that application, if not more. Third-party signage is always going to be larger format, larger in scale, and in addition to signage of building occupants, which is permitted in the City of Vincent, which is about local businesses promoting their services and offerings. I do think that at the moment, if we allowed a couple of billboards, I don't think it would have a significant effect, but if we're prepared to yield and we see billboards emerge across the City of Vincent, I think that it will really change the character and visual amenity of our area. The history of billboards in the City of Vincent is that when the City of Perth became split, and the City of Vincent made a decision at the time to allow 12 billboards to continue, which were approved by the City of Perth. And the City of Vincent Council has approved 2 billboards. I understand that's 2 static boards each. So 2 approvals. These are time limited approvals, and as Councillor Loden has outlined, that is due to site constraints and is very much planned to see those sites develop in the future, perhaps when we're not so car dependent. So I would like to thank the applicant for seeking to make changes. I note that it has been reduced in size. I do note your commentary in relation to the crash data. All I can say in relation to that is that the Main Roads has continued to be party to this application and has taken that feedback on board, but continues, they state that they continue to object due to the crash rate and site location regulations. So I do also note the community benefit option put forward, and I thank the applicant for that. Unfortunately, that's not a relevant planning consideration that the city can take into consideration. So whilst I understand that considerable effort and work has gone into this, that just the size has reduced, I don't feel that it is in keeping with our policy position, and I think that this, if approved, could weaken the city's policy position going forward. And it is a policy position that I do fundamentally and comprehensively support. Is there any further comments from council members before I put the vote? Okay, I'll put it. This is all in favour of the officer recommendation to refuse. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Fotakis voting against. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item raised by through public question time, a question on notice, was 10.1, Waste Strategy Project. Number 8, Commercial Waste Collections Update Report. Councillor Toppelberg is leaving the room with a proximity interest. Could I call for a mover and seconder, please? Move, Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I note there's an amendment on the table. I will just say my piece in relation to the substantive. I'm supportive of the amendment coming forward. I think ultimately we have, the city has worked towards meeting its goal around zero waste to landfill. This is part of that, but it's also part of, I guess, unpicking a service that has been very challenging to actually really understand, because it has developed over time into the provision of a, I guess, a level of service, a high level of service for some ratepayers in the commercial space, I guess a fairly equivalent level of service to a residential service to others, and then also the service being subsidised effectively by the residential ratepayers. I don't believe that, so I do understand that this service is not, I guess, a contemporary approach to a commercial waste management, and that the introduction of FOGO is going to complicate things even further. So I think it is a logical time for the city to exit this space. And I also note that our change in the rate in the dollar for residential and commercial in this year's budget certainly is in alignment with a reduction in service provision to commercial ratepayers that would come through ceasing commercial waste. So I think that this is an appropriate time to do it. I will support any amendment in relation to a rebate and management of transition, because I think those are really important things. But overall, I'm supportive of this project leading to the discontinuance of the commercial waste service in July 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess just a few points from me around this. I think all the elements were there around the business case, but probably could have been clarified a bit more in the report. So from my perspective, when you look at it as from a financial perspective, from a business case, there's a $920,000 saving for the city in this, which over a 10-year period is roughly $9.2 million. There's some discounting involved in that as well, obviously. There's some savings around, some smaller savings around as well that you see from not needing additional rubbish trucks. And this financial saving needs to be assessed against the qualitative impact that we see from withdrawing that service. And there's two consequences that we'll see out of that. First is the difficulty for those commercial providers in finding a provider for that waste. And the city is proposing to provide support to people to connect with those services, and also to provide a backstop that if businesses are unable to provide a service, we will continue to collect their waste. So that is a good solution to that issue. The second part is around the cost. This, whatever service they go to, will cost them money. Broadly, what we should see is that, and I agree with that principle, that a commercial provider will be more efficient and be able to deliver a more tailored service to individual businesses. So on net, the total cost to our commercial sector compared to what the cost is to the city to provide that service will be lower. However, there will be variable impacts depending on who is who. Some businesses out there will see a large number, already have a large number of bins. That those are actually the ones that have historically been being subsidised by the residential sector. And so they will likely see an increase in their waste cost because of that. And then other providers, well, then there's the providers that have that are using a commercial service already, so they will see no difference. And then there's people that will see a gain because of that commercial efficiency in getting a more tailored service. Part of the argument for this as well is around our waste strategy, around moving towards zero waste. Simply no longer collecting the rubbish and getting someone else to do it is a little bit fraught with the idea that you're reducing waste, because that waste is just going somewhere else. But I do take the point that by providing a more bespoke service, the place that just produces green bottles as their waste product can get a very tailored service for that. The place that produces a lot of cardboard boxes can get a very tailored service for that, which will then actually result in a better waste outcome for for the city as a whole if we look at the amount of waste we produce within the city's boundaries. So in that sense, I think this is the correct decision. I agree with that. I also agree with the need to provide a rebate to offset those costs for those commercial businesses that have been impacted by that. I support the proposed amendment, and if no one else wants to move it, I will move it, but I'll let someone else have a go first if they so wish. Because I think that support and recognition that we are reducing a cost on the city and impose that and kind of shifting that cost to these commercial businesses. So we need to recognise that part. I also recognise that we need to consider this more fully between now and the next budget and how we exactly deal with that going forward. But I think the starting off with a rebate of that amount back to those commercial businesses to help with that shift to their private providers is a good initial first step for now.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. I'll just see if any council members wish to talk to the substantive. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I actually was going to talk to it and move the amendment if you would like, if people are happy with
That's up to you.
So I'm supportive of the officer's recommendation, and I do accept the business case that this is something that will have a net benefit both financially and from a waste strategy point of view. The sticking point for me has always been the transition and how we support our commercial ratepayers through that change. Acknowledging what's already been commented is that will affect them in many different ways, and while it may be a better outcome for some, it may not be for others. So it's really about making sure there's enough time and that there's support to ensure that that transition is as smooth as possible. On that basis, I would like to move the amendment on the grey because I think it addresses those transitional issues.
We have an amendment on the grey being moved. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Gontaszewski.
Can I request that it's on the screen somehow? Just or it's the one in the there's only the one, isn't there?
There's only one, Councillor Loden, but I think it is a good idea to screen share it if possible. Wendy, is that possible? Thank you very much. Yes, we're going to screen share that, Councillor Loden. Do you wish to speak to the amendment, Councillor Castle?
Just briefly, I think that the amendment proposed really makes me feel more comfortable with this motion, given that it does build in some transition. I think at the very least, the first year of rebate is necessary to make sure that our commercial tenants, commercial ratepayers have time to adjust. And I would welcome that report on how that might look following that first year of rebate and whether any further rebate will be required, because a lot of the commentary around this in the past has been that we don't exactly know how this will impact until it's in place. So that gives us an opportunity to get some more current and accurate data on that.
Councillor Gontaszewski, do you wish to speak to it? Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Fotakis.
Yeah, I've just got a question through you, Mayor. It's just with regards to the review report and gathering that data through you to the director of how we might actually, what that might actually look like in terms of whether that's consultation or surveys or the like of how that would actually, that data would be gathered.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've not decided on the specific way in which we will do it, so that's still up for discussion. I mean, this is an amendment that we've seen the last couple of days, so we've not mapped that out as yet.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? Look, I'll speak to it. I prepared this amendment because I felt that if we were going to be considering ceasing commercial waste, it is a very significant decision to be making and a decision that will have impact on service provision and potentially financial costs for our commercial ratepayers. So I felt that it would be very difficult to go through a change process without actually being clear to our commercial ratepayers about what sort of rebate they would be looking at. This is an estimate based on the $921,000 operational savings projected by our Infrastructure and Environment Directorate. That's what I'm trying to pin you on that, Director, specifically, although I hope it's ballpark correct. So it's really about saying that if we're communicating this change in service, we can't just be fuzzy about we may rebate, we may not. We need to be very clear, because ultimately, whilst the objective is to reduce waste, this is a financial decision also for our commercial ratepayers. It was good to see some of the case studies provided in the business case that looked at where efficiencies are gained and tailored services are provided, because the city's services have been, our 240 wheelie bins, and commercial service is quite different in that you can get large scale bins and a range of recycling services that might be very specific, as Councillor Loden referred to. It may just be bottles, it may just be cardboard. That's very different to what the city has been able to provide to our commercial ratepayers, and that it may actually lead to cost savings, because we know that there are commercial ratepayers who are either already 15% not using our service, those that are actually topping up with commercial services on top of the bins provided by the City of Vincent, and those that are paying for additional City of Vincent bins, which is probably not really financially comparable when you go to a tailored commercial service. But in order for this to run smoothly, I felt it was important for our commercial ratepayers to know that there's an acknowledgement that this is a big change, that the rebate is available, and that once we actually have a report back to council about the implementation, we can then make further decisions. It is a difficult time to have spoken to the amended substantive motion. Would you like to speak to it? Okay, I'll just pick up where I left off to say that this has been a very difficult decision personally for me, and I have required a lot of additional information from administration. I thank you for providing that information. I've asked a lot of questions. I have asked questions about how we would compare to other ratepaying ratepayers paying in other local government areas, and it seems that this is quite commonplace across other local governments. And I have been provided with some information on what happens in the city of Joondalup, Stirling, Wanneroo, Perth, Cambridge, Victoria Park, Fremantle, Subiaco, South Perth, comparably to the City of Vincent. And I was going to request that that information could be provided in the minutes, because I think that is important information, or to be recorded as part of this decision-making process. I also just wanted to talk about the fact that if we were to run a fully costed commercial waste service as suggested in through a question received on notice this evening, I think the cost would be significant. Director, we've spoken about the fact that we would need, and please correct me, this is my recollection, that we'd need at least 2 trucks, that we would need different bin infrastructure and trucks that would cater to carrying those, like emptying the large bins, and that we would need to run additional staff. And then that service would have to be competitive with external services, because once we're running a commercial service like other local governments, we'd need to charge for it, and then we'd need to compete in an open market. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, Nicole, that's correct. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So there are reasons here. I think that the good news is that we can help our commercial businesses through this, that we have commercial providers that already work in Vincent that are very interested in providing tailored professional services, and that'll actually present a lot better for our commercial ratepayers. Rather than having a series of unending wheelie bins, they will be able to have bins that really fit and a larger scale, so that we hopefully will reduce some of the smell and some of the mess associated with commercial waste. So a tough decision. The timing really reflects the fact that we probably can't continue as we are, and particularly with rolling out FOGO to our residential, to our residents in October 2021. I'll get there eventually. Calendar will just keep moving till we get there. That this really needed to align, because we were also conscious of the fact that with moving to FOGO collection, that alters our residential collection services, and effectively we have been kind of just jostling along with an ad hoc commercial service that's been tacked on to the end of our residential round. And with that significant change coming, I think that's really just been a realisation that we couldn't continue as we are, and that we just need our our commercial ratepayers to have a professional service. So, yep, here to hear feedback from commercial ratepayers on how this impacts and to try to soften any transitional issues as much as possible. And I think it's important to have that 9 months rollout with a really strong engagement and communication campaign attached to it. Are there any further comments on commercial waste? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Welcome back, Councillor Toppelberg. Yeah. Okay, so we're now going to go back to deal with items that we haven't already carried on block or dealt with and move through sequentially. So that takes us back to the beginning at 9.1, number 465, William Street, Perth, proposed change of use from eating house to restaurant and small bar. Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I was happy with the officer recommendation until I had a telephone call from the applicant today, who indicated they have already proceeded with the acoustic report, and that the acoustic report that they received, and granted that whilst it's a scientific analysis, the acoustic report that they received, to quote the manager of development and design, was quite heavy-handed in what it was proposing, and effectively would require something in the order of $100,000 worth of investment in the building in order to be able to meet what is a theoretical noise issue. If you actually consider what's being proposed, we talk a lot about being open for business, removing red tape, making things accessible and easy. This is effectively a situation where two people can be standing and enjoying a drink with a bowl of pasta in between them currently, as the approval stands, at 11:45 p.m. without issue. If there are noise complaints, that gets dealt with by our health officers. And because the applicant is seeking for that to be able to be done without a bowl of pasta in between them, we've now triggered a requirement for a report to be provided. And that report is asking for, as I said, something in the order of $100,000 worth of investment in the property, which my concern is that if we were to approve this as recommended, because it has a requirement, the recommended measures included in the report shall be implemented as part of this development. It effectively is a Clayton's approval, but it would also render the site impossible to operate as a hospitality venue going forward, because that requirement is unduly onerous for the number of patrons. In this unusual circumstance, we have evidence on the ground of 2.5 years of operation with nil complaints. The property is zoned commercial. It's adjacent to two properties to the west that are zoned mixed use. The noise regs don't consider the mixed use zoning. They only consider the actual use at the time, which is residential next door. Given that the applicant, during the advertising period, there were no complaints, during that period of operation, there were no complaints, but during the advertising period, there were no submissions received from the adjacent neighbour. It's directly opposite district centre zone properties. I think it would fail the reasonable persons test for somebody to say that this property is in an area that is more sensitive to residential noise than any other within the city. So I think that what's proposed is wholly reasonable. There is an element of risk that would sit with the applicant, because they do ultimately have to comply with those regs. But in a conversation today with the acting director, he indicated that whilst the officers and our health officers would have to give due regard to the noise regs, that it is not an arbitrary figure that must be complied with, that there are that the circumstance of the locational circumstance and other things can be taken into account in the event of a noise issue, and a mitigated outcome can be achieved. So I know you like to hear from the seconder before the moving of amendments, so I'll keep that there. But I did initially, as you would have seen today, look at putting some level of subjectivity into the implementation of the acoustic report, but after consultation with the manager, that was recommended that we either leave it in or delete it, and I've landed on the proposal to delete it, but I'll let the seconder speak, and otherwise we'll move the amendment on the light lemon.
Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. I support the substantive motion. This is an area of William Street that we need significant activation, and it would be good to have this more vibrant, particularly for those businesses that are already up there. I don't have major concerns about the amendment, so happy for Councillor Toppelberg to move that.
Councillor Toppelberg, unless anyone's throwing up their hand. No, go ahead.
Yes, I'll move the amendment on the yellow, which is the condition 3 be deleted and the remaining conditions be renumbered accordingly.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. So I won't speak to it too much further. We do have sensitive noise issues in some areas. I note had a discussion. We pushed pretty hard, for example, with a proposal for a small bar use that was on Lindsay Street, which is just down the road from here. The circumstances regarding the noise, potential noise impact, as I understood that, was actually related more to the fact that it was a plus or minus 70 car park that was proposed for that site, and the opening and closing of doors and the noise associated with people coming back to their vehicles was probably of more concern. And it was also completely surrounded by residentially zoned properties and a lot of mixed multi-residential properties as well. The circumstance of this location is unique, and I think that whilst the applicant has gone due diligence all the way and actually spent their money and had their acoustic report done before it's been required, what it's highlighted is that the requirement for meeting those or implementing those measures will actually render the approval unable to be achieved, given that it's only a 70-person operation. And I think that the fact that it's existed on the ground very similarly for a number of years without issue shows that we can be mature about our licensed venues in the City of Vincent, and hopefully this one will be able to continue to be a hospitality venue.
Councillor Hallett.
Can I just ask a question about the reference to 2.5 years? Is that operating for the entirety? Because I know it has been vacant at various times over the last few years.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yeah, I believe the previous occupant that operated the restaurant there was in there for 2.5 years. It has been vacant for a number of months.
And can you just confirm that where the nearest residential premises are?
Through you, Mayor Cole, immediately to the west is the nearest residential premises.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
So I was sort of okay with this until I got I need some clarification, because it appeared that what was said in administration's response to the amendment was it's okay because they still have to adhere to the regulations. And then Councillor Toppelberg appeared to say that sometimes, even if it's over the regulations, when it's measured, that you don't have to adhere to them. You can come to like agreement on what you might do or something like that. And I just want to get complete clarification that if noise, sound attenuation measures as per an acoustic report are not implemented before occupation and use, but that the noise subsequent to that is identified as a result of standard complaint receipt processes, etc., as being above that would be acceptable, which would be acceptable under the environmental regulations, that the city's approach would be that mitigation measures as per, for example, the acoustic report would need to be implemented to bring that into compliance with the regulations? Or is the city's approach that you could probably be over, even if it's measured as over, as long as there was something else that was done? I have a little bit of concern.
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps I can respond. Ultimately, the noise regulations set limitations around noise emissions. Now, it's a test around what is deemed to be unreasonable level of noise. That's how it's referred to in the legislation. So ultimately, there are noise limits that are set or prescribed, and there are influencing factors based on the context and the location. In this scenario, there has been a noise report undertaken, and it does suggest that there are recommendations to be implemented to address the noise that would be emitted to make it compliant with the noise limits. That is one way of satisfying the noise limits. Doesn't mean that there's other ways, operational modifications such as limiting the number of people outside, that could also achieve the same outcome in terms of not exceeding noise limits. So this is one way of addressing it, but if this condition was not imposed as has been moved through the amendment, then ultimately it still would remain the operator's obligation to comply with the noise regs, but there might be alternates that could be explored.
Okay, I'm satisfied. I think ultimately this is largely an on-paper kind of exercise around a change in use. And as long as there's a clear path for anyone that is impacted by noise to engage with the city, to have noise readings undertaken, and if it is confirmed that the current operations are exceeding those levels, that mitigations can be put in place and would be required to put in place for the operation to continue, I'm fine with that.
Any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it, all those in favour? I declare the amendment carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Is there any further comments or debate? Okay, I'll put it, all those in favour. I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. The next item is 9.4, the City of Vincent Rebound Plan. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. I'll just refer to page, so I think there's a lot of great stuff in here, but one thing I just wanted to check, and it's both from anecdotal and personal experience. Page 198 talks about enhance the presentation of town centres and main streets, talks about streetscape enhancements, planter boxes, seating, greenery, tree planting, art, positive messaging and lighting. Have we considered, or, and I would happily either move it by amendment, or I'm guessing that the section that sits in the explanation is secondary to the enhance the presentation of town centres and main streets. But the issues of general cleaning and just basic council responsibilities, graffiti management, steam clean, etc. I think we've moved in most of our town centres from twice a year to once a year at some point, I think. Can I just ask the question whether we've had any cutbacks in our cleaning or graffiti removal services as a result of operational budget constraints in the COVID world? Can I ask that first as a question?
Yeah. Through McCall, I can answer that question. No, not as a result of COVID.
Okay. And okay, have we had cutbacks as a result of any other measures?
Through McCall, no. No, I mean, I've been in the city 2.5 years and there's been no cutbacks in those services.
So I do note that we have changed how often we steam clean the paving, certainly in my time here. I guess without by amendment, but perhaps just by, or happy to do so, otherwise just by nod from the Director of Infrastructure and Environment, just to note 220 grand is a lot of money to spend, and some of that stuff is fluff. I'll call it that in what it presents. I think that the core things that people expect from a local government is things like graffiti removal and to have clean streets, and certainly I'll provide it as an anecdotal comment, but we could probably lift our game in that area, and it would be good to see, in my personal opinion, some of that budget be spent on some of those basics, and it may just be an extra steam clean or perhaps some help for our full-time graffiti removal officer, who is usually run off his feet and takes sometimes more than a week to be able to get to locations. So can I just ask the question, without amendment, is it possible for some of that money to be allocated under the guise of enhancing the presentation of town centres and main streets?
The CEO has informed me that we have our coordinator, place manager, sorry Georgia, how did I forget, place manager available here to provide a response.
I'll perhaps ask a question.
Just in whether or not Georgia could break down what we've listed there as 220,000, what's already been budgeted and how that's been allocated.
Yep, through you, Mayor Cole. The 220 at the moment talks about 30,000 for streetscape enhancements, which is what we've got on our operational budget. There's $170,000 currently attributed to the Cleaver Main Street project, which is broken down into 90,000 for road resurfacing, 30 for parks and green, and 50,000 for general enhancement through the cash in lieu parking reserve. There's also $5,000 from the North Perth Place Plan budget, which is talking about upgrades in North Perth, 5,000 from Leederville and 10,000 from Mount Hawthorn Town Centre. But we could certainly look at how we might, I wouldn't say that we would reallocate this budget, but we could look at how we could focus on street cleaning in general and graffiti removal and improving those processes so that the town centres do look better from a presentation perspective.
Thanks, George. I guess, yeah, I mean, the purpose of raising it was not to get into the operational level of every dollar that's spent, but just, I guess, to highlight that some of the basics of what's expected of us can have a significant impact. And I think that we would be very much welcomed if we can find the time and money to be able to go and do some of those things more often. And certainly those things that you mentioned, I wouldn't characterize as fluff. So follow. There you go. But I guess in the context of somebody seeing a nice planter box put out in front when they've got 10-year-old chewing gum and other things out the front of their premises, would perhaps look to a local government and say there are some things that should be a higher priority in terms of spend and time. That's perhaps a better way to describe it. So yeah, appreciate the response, and I'm happy to support the officer recommendation.
Councillors, does anyone else wish to speak to this? Councillor Fotakis.
I was going to. I'm glad that you corrected yourself there, Councillor Toppelberg, because there are some items in that that aren't fluff. So I'm really glad that you did correct yourself on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. I too was going to say some of the things you refer to as fluff are some of the most widely requested items that our local businesses say will make the town centres more inviting and more pleasurable to visit. Noting the cleaning request, I think that is good. We do need to make sure our town centres are clean, particularly at this time. It's even more important than ever. And I think that all of these things can be accommodated, the fluff and the cleaning. All will be appreciated by our town centre businesses and our local community. I'm absolutely sure of it. Look, I'm very happy with the economic rebound plan. I think this has been developed quickly. It's action orientated. It's a live document that can be updated as we go. So I think this is a great model, and it is really fitting for the type of document that we need right now when we're not entirely sure what the future holds. I think this has set up a great model, and I commend Georgia and the Policy in Place team for this work. Councillor Hallett, is that hand in the air?
Sorry, just something I have seen on the page after the Mayor's message in the document. It's got phase 1, 2 and 3, but maybe there's missing names to that. So not sure if this is a final version.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I think that we did have a graphic which I think we used to highlight the phase 1, 2 and 3, and I think we can use what was previously attached in the COVID-19 relief and recovery strategy. If we can, we'll correct that on publication. Through you, Mayor Cole, no, that would just repeat the existing text in the COVID-19 relief and recovery strategy with the titles of phase 1, 2 and 3. So Councillor Hallett's picked up correctly, and I think we actually have a graphic to explain that in the final published version.
Okay, so the graphic can be added. It doesn't need to be an amendment, says the CEO. Any further comments on the economic rebound plan? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Okay, the next item is 10.2, Manor Inc. meal service at World Square update. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just as I indicated last week, just wanting to bring this forward to amend the date so it comes to the October meeting rather than November, because the date that the license or that the current approval expires is the 30th of November, and I don't think it's fair to make that decision on the 17th because we don't know how people will view it.
Can I just ask a question? For if that was the case, how many weeks would that give administration before this report had to be finalised for the briefing? 2 weeks. Okay, I do have a bit of an update, and I'm not sure whether 2 weeks will be sufficient, but you haven't put the amendment on the table yet, so perhaps you could allow some debate. So it was seconded by Councillor Wallace. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Wallace?
No, thank you, Mayor Cole.
Okay. Does anyone wish to speak to it? Okay. I attended a city homelessness response meeting yesterday with the City of Perth, John Carey MLA, who's co-chairing with Gai McMath, the Commissioner for Perth, and various government agencies and community PBIs around the table who work in the homelessness space. There was some discussion about some further options that could be explored for Manor Inc. I note that they don't wish to go to the Moore Street precinct, but there was some discussion about the fact that there were a couple of times at Moore Street that could do with additional support. There was also discussion about whether there may be an option to provide some support to Rua, who are still operating a day centre up to 1 p.m. So arising out of that, I have requested that the city arrange a meeting with the City of Perth and Manor Inc. to have further discussions, and I'm just not sure whether 2 weeks is sufficient to fully explore all of those options, because the other option is that if we do deal with it in November, if we haven't, we can always just roll over for a shorter period. It doesn't have to be a full 12 months if we're still working through issues. So I'm just really, I don't know whether the CEO really had a chance to speak to City of Perth about that, following up on the meeting.
Through Mayor Cole, we are in close contact with them. We have got an early indication from Manor that they would like to renew their approval to operate out of World Square. I think we probably could have those meetings in the next week or two and provide a follow-up report to council on after exploring those options.
So 2 weeks is sufficient for us to have a meeting with City of Perth and to explore other options. I note that Manor want this rolled over, but what I'm talking about is working from the cooperative position of being a member of the City Homelessness Response Framework, actually having a meeting with the City of Perth and Manor Inc. and exploring collaboratively with those other parties around the table about whether there are other options that haven't yet been explored. So the question is 2 weeks long enough to allow that process to happen?
Through you, Michael, it could be, depending when the meetings occur and how successful they are. So I think probably couldn't guarantee a report to October, but it's not impossible if that's an answer. There is the issue that I raised last time is that the CEO is correct. We've received notification that Manor Inc. do wish to extend. So, but we need probably a formal indication that they did. That's informal at the moment. So.
Well, that's the background that I wanted to provide. So that's those conversations were just happening yesterday.
Can I move an amendment, Mayor Cole?
Sure.
Change the word 17 November to 20 October 2020 Ordinary Meeting of Council. I'll speak to it if I get a seconder.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. I agree 100% with the Mayor. There's nothing preventing Council from giving a shorter term approval, but I think that the idea of we seem to get in the habit when we have these shorter term leases of 12 months or otherwise because there's a requirement to reapply or otherwise that we make the decision at the death knock. And I think that there are competing views about the service that's provided, the desire of Manor Inc. to stay or go, the value that they provide. I think that it's an extremely vexing issue for decision makers and for surrounding businesses, and also for those who access the services. It's an essential. The service itself, regardless of where it's provided, is something that is essential in a city life. But I think that it would be in everyone's interest to at least not delay it until the 17th, because if council was of a view to say no, I don't think that it leaves anyone in a fair position. So I'm happy for that discussion to happen a month earlier, regardless of whether it can be a progress report on how those meetings are going. And certainly between the issue of the briefing report, I would assume, or the finishing of the briefing report and the decision making, that would progress even further. So I'm comfortable with October as a date to have that next catch up.
Seconded by Councillor Gonchevsky. Do you wish to speak to it? Council members speaking to the amendment. Could I also just request, is it possible to get any further information on how many people Manor Inc. is serving are homeless as opposed to people who have a home but are experiencing food security issues. I think that really needs to be fleshed out because that's quite a significant change in terms of information brought forward to council at this particular juncture.
Yeah, so through you, Michael, to answer maybe both questions, I'm sure we could get an update report to October. And as outlined in the report, there is that survey taking place now with clients to find out, are they homeless or not? So we should be able to provide that information at the same time.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? The amendment is carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Okay, we're bypassing community and business services and going to Chief Executive Officer outcomes items. So the first item is a absolute majority decision required. That's why it's been brought forward for debate. This is the adoption of the Corporate Business Plan 2020-21 to 2023-24 and Capital Works Program 2021 to 23-24.
Apologies, Mayor, I have need to leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Loden. Just noting Councillor Loden's leaving the meeting. Could I call for a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Fotakis. Do you wish to speak to it?
I'm sick of hearing from me too. I just put my hand up because you had a quiet room. So
Thank you, I appreciate that. Councillor Fotakis, do you wish to speak to it? This got a very
No.
thorough going over at the briefing, so I
Yeah,
understand.
no, I don't need to, Mayor.
Is there any comments? Okay, I do think there's a lot of questions and a lot of, yes, additional information provided. All right, I'm happy to put it. All those in favour? I declare the Corporate Business Plan and 4-year Capital Works Program carried. Okay. Item 12.4, outcome of advertising and adoption of meeting procedures policy. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question, and it relates to meetings in particular. Briefings already contained. It's a question through you to the Manager of Governance. The current meeting procedures during the state of emergency are allowing for people who don't, members of the community who don't attend in person, to be able to submit questions. Those questions are read at the meeting, regardless of whether they address matters that are on the agenda or not. I guess the question is...
Sorry to interrupt, just noting I've returned to the meeting.
So the question is whether administration has a view on, given that we are providing in the chamber social distancing measures, and there is also opportunity for elected members to be addressed via email, telephone, or in person or otherwise, and given that the matters can be responded to in the minutes, so it can be a matter of public record, do we require matters that aren't on the agenda to be, or questions being asked where people don't choose not to attend for whatever reason it may be? Is there any, does administration have a view on whether they actually need to be read out in the council chamber?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a good question. So the ability for people to send in their questions or statements via email was included in the city's electronic meeting guidelines. That's something that we put in place when COVID commenced and we needed to have meetings electronically. So e-meetings, the e-meetings will occur during the emergency period, which has now been extended. We could review, like I'm open to reviewing the electronic meeting guidelines and change those requirements. Potentially we could limit the questions to 3 minutes. So when they're read out, it's just for 3 minutes. So that would limit the length of the questions and statements. We could also require that they relate to items on the agenda only. It is a measure that's, I guess, assisting people in providing their questions and statements to council, but potentially they could also email them in. Some could be just dealt with administratively. So we can review that policy and present it back to council.
Thank you. So just I have a strong view on transparency and openness and the ability for people to ask whatever they like whenever they like. I think that there's value if people wish to have their questions on the public record that being able to submit them and being able to have them answered as a matter of record. So those are recorded, but the idea of, in some circumstances, of people being able to ask anything they like about anything they like and having a public forum without attending when it's not relating to items that are on the agenda, I don't know that that necessarily is in the public interest at that point. Those questions can still be noted and, as I say, form part of, the responses can form part of the public record in the minutes. But my personal view is that if people aren't going to be here, if they don't have questions that relate to the agenda, those matters can perhaps be dealt with without needing to be read out in the public forum. But that's my personal view.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
I'm supportive of the officer recommendation. I note the commentary in relation to the potential modification of the electronic meeting guidelines. And I have to say I'm probably in alignment with Councillor Toppelberg, subject to, review of the final wording. I think that I'm not sure. I definitely think during the state of emergency, we need to have the facility for people to submit questions relating to items on the agenda so that they can be heard and considered at the time that we're considering the item. But for other questions, I don't necessarily think that there's a much of a benefit to have them read out versus actually appearing within the minutes the meeting documentation. So I'm fine with that. But yes, supportive of this substantive item.
Through Mayor Cole, just a comment in relation to Councillor Toppelberg's question. It probably would help to clarify, we've got public question time and we allow public questions and statements, and it's up to Council to decide through the meeting procedures whether or not Council receives questions on agenda items during the briefing and or the Council meeting itself, or whether or not there should be some allocated time for statements on any issue pertaining to the city, which may not be related to the agenda items, and that could be potentially clearer in the way we structure public question time to separate questions on the agenda from statements in general.
Councillors, any further comments on this item? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Okay, item 12.4, sorry, just dealt with item 12.4. Item 12.6, new lease to Bethany Group Incorporated, Royal Park, Ball Street, West Perth. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. I pulled this one out. I did have some conversations with the Manager of Corporate Strategy and Governance. I did receive an email late today, which I think just came to me, but essentially the question was asked whether they could share. If we look, I think everyone agrees, leave the GRV itself, but if you look at the rental value that's proposed, that space effectively given for exclusive use for 5 years with a 5-year option to an entity that is providing an essential service, but excuse me, the construct of it seemed at odds with the principles of the property management framework, which I know was pulled from the agenda, but the principle of $1,000 a year for someone to have exclusive use for 10 years over a site just to provide services during the daytime to a few Vincent residents seemed at odds with those principles. I understand that the manager did go back and have conversations with the occupant. They essentially had replied originally to say it's too hard because we've got stuff that's private, so we don't want other people being allowed in here. And I had my own view on whether that's a suitable response. They have advised that they, and if you don't mind, I'll just read briefly from the email I received today. The manager at Bethany advised that supportive of a shared use co-location, provided that they coordinate it to ensure the appropriate confidentiality of their items. And also that they have concern about the hygiene standards, which is a fair concern. I'm not of a view the city should be, this is me personally, I'm not of a view the city should be managing the facility and hiring it out as we do other spaces. I don't have an issue with a lease or license arrangement, but Bethany have advised that they are scheduling chair yoga and book club events in the evenings. And they'll also go into trial opening on Saturdays. I guess my question to the Manager of Governance would be, in the current recommendation, And I suppose we have the opportunity at 5 years because we get the opportunity to say whether we want them to have a further lease or not. But other than just encouraging them to do so, is there a way that we can formalise our request or requirement for Bethany to actually be providing a more diverse uses and to be making better use of the facility, particularly in the evenings, given that most of their use will be during the daytime?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So in accordance with the property management framework, as you said, we are encouraging co-location or shared use. So in our lease template, which we've recently updated for commercial leases, so category 3 leases like this, we do have a clause that refers to shared usage, and it refers to the lessee being able to allow other groups to use it for a fee that's consistent with fees in the city schedule and fees and charges. So that clause would be in this lease. In terms of actually requiring them to use it in the evenings, I'm not sure what sort of wording. So potentially we could have something in the recommendations to say that council is encouraging them to co-locate or allow other groups to use it in the evening, provided the purpose is consistent with their lease purpose that council's approved. Would something like that assist?
Just, I guess, and it's perhaps more a question or an idea, in the event that someone came to the city and was wishing to run senior yoga classes, for example, and we suggested that they contact Bethany because that space was available, and Bethany was not of a mind to want to allow it to happen for reasons that the city didn't believe was reasonable, do we have the ability to coerce them to be able to make it available for those sorts of activities, given that both the premises and the use is suitable for it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we wouldn't use the word coerce, but we could certainly have those discussions with Bethany, who are very open to it, and we would be, there's no urgency from administration's perspective for this to be agreed at the meeting tonight, and would be happy to have that, provide some further information from Bethany on that, which would be about the arrangements they could put in place for us to potentially invite expressions of interest or some sort of mechanism to make sure that what is essentially a community building is available for community use to other third parties, as long as it complied with the hygiene and other safety requirements that Bethany needs it for during the day in particular.
I'm not seeking to defer. I think that the recommendation one that talks about the following key terms means that everything's covered, and there can still be other terms that can be included in the proposed lease. So unless there's a pressing reason, I'm not seeking to have it to come back again, personally.
CEO is saying yes, that's fine. That can still happen if it's adopted this evening. Okay, any further comments on this item? Okay, I'll put it, all those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. Okay, as is practice, we do pull forward the item on the Audit Committee. So this is 12.8, the report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 1st of September 2020, an amendment to Audit Committee terms of reference. Moved, Councillor Topple, I'll go to Councillor Toppelberg because he's a member of the Audit Committee, but the second, who would like to second? Councillor Fotakis.
No comment, Mayor. Just happy with the officer recommendation.
Councillor Fotakis.
Same here, Mayor. Thank you.
The CEO has just asked me to mention that one of our Audit Committee members, Elizabeth Hunt, sorry, apologies, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Hunt has resigned, and I believe that there will be an EOI and that there will be some recommendations coming forward to Council for the appointment of a new member, new community representative to the Audit Committee. Thank you, CEO. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it, all those in favour? I declare the item carried unanimously. That takes us to the final item for the evening of item of business, and that is 12.10, new lease to Kids Galore Proprietary Limited, 15 Haynes Street, North Perth. An absolute majority decision is required on this item. Moved by Councillor Wallace, second.
I'll move it, but I wanted to discuss the confidential report as well.
That's fine, we still have to move it and second it first. Seconded by Councillor Castle. Oh, sorry, I'll go to Councillor Smith because I keep missing you, but sorry, is that okay just to share it around? Councillor Smith. Would you like to discuss any of this at all in the public realm? Is there, or do you wish to go to the confidential attachment straight away?
No, it's really just the figure for the rent that I had an issue with that I think needs discussion.
Okay, I'll just go to the manager of governance and say, can we discuss the rental value, the recommendations on the rent, or should we go behind closed doors to discuss that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it will depend on the questions, but if it's just about the value, then that's fine because that's in the public realm already. But if it's like the basis for the valuer's report or you're questioning his assumptions, then potentially I think we should go behind closed doors then.
So it's more about the valuation, Councillor Wallace?
Yeah, just the assumptions that were made by the valuer in calculating
all
the
right, then
market
we
rent.
will have to go behind closed doors. So could I please have a mover and seconder to go behind closed doors to discuss the confidential amendment? That's moved Councillor Wallace, seconded Councillor Castle. All those in favour? Declare the procedural motion carried unanimously. Just closing the doors and the virtual doors.